Let's begin our today's event. Hello to everybody. Welcome to our virtual discussion, Germany and the Eastern Partnership countries after the 2021 German parliamentary elections. As we wait with anticipation for several elections this year, today's discussion will focus on Germany. In particular, Germany's foreign policy in the election campaign and after, and what implications it might have on Georgia and on the Eastern Partnership. This is the last public event this season organized by the Georgian Institute of Politics. And I would like to say a big thank you to all of you who followed our publications, discussions, conferences. We have been happy to connect with you both online, mostly online throughout the last year, and promise even more events and discussions as well as our publications after the summer break. Today's discussion is organized within the project Georgia's Europeanization, Assessing Progress After 2020, with the support of Open Society Georgian Foundation. And it is the first such event of the series we will be organizing throughout the next year on Georgia's relations to the EU, Europeanization process as such, and similar topics. We will keep you all updated and will invite you to the future events as well. Today we have an interesting thought-provoking panel, I hope. But before getting into it, we will start with the welcoming remarks. And I would like to invite Professor Kornely Kakachia, Director of the Georgian Institute of Politics, to say the first few words.
Thank you, Renata. I would like also to welcome all of you to this event. And first of all, Ambassador KNIRSCH was kind enough to agree to welcome our discussion. As you know, this is very important topic. As far as we know that after the election, German Chancellor is leaving the post, and there's a lot of speculation in and around the region and also beyond of that among the expert communities. What will be the factors which will shape the German's foreign policy towards the EaP countries and generally towards the European Union? I think this is very essential question for many Georgians, as you know that, and I said it's my recent comments to Erosion that there was a discussion about that is EU overtaking United States in Georgia? And my question was, it should not be surprised because at the end of the day, we don't know when and how, but Georgia is going to join the European Union, not the United States. So it means that we need to follow very thoroughly, you know, not only EU affairs, I mean, like Brussels centered, like information, but we also need to care about the member states perspective and especially the bigger countries like France, Germany, some other countries. And we should really know more about these countries and what kind of factors impacts foreign policy in generally, the stability of these countries, because this is very important for EaP countries, including Georgia, for many, many reasons, which I'm not going to, like enlist right now. And another thing why we actually brought this discussion is that, there will be a lot of challenges internally after the German election. We don't know what kind of coalition we will have, who will become the leader, and with all these consequences. So I think we really need to be a little bit aware, about internal politics, because internal politics also, affects the foreign policy of Germany. And that's why we also asked our senior fellow, Bezina Lebanidze, who was kind to write a policy memo about this issue, because he's based in Germany, so he's commuting between Germany and Georgia, so he knows both countries quite well. So it might be quite interesting to hear his presentation today. And I think also that we need a little bit, to start to continue this discussion about between EU member states and Georgia and vice versa. I understand that because of COVID situation, these events are not so easy to organize like it used to be before. But I think we still need to get more knowledge about the current events and which actually shapes Georgia's future trajectory towards Europe and Euro-Atlantic security. I think I'll stop here and thank you very much. And I hope we will have a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would also like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Hubert KNIRSCH. Thank you very much for joining us today, for agreeing to share your thoughts for the keynote speech on this very important topic of Germany's elections. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Renata and Professor Kakachia. It is indeed a pleasure for me to join your discussion, to see many friends here. And I do think that I will be the one who will learn the most from this discussion, because it is extremely interesting for me to see and hear what our Georgian friends think about German politics, what their expectations are, perhaps also their doubts and their questions. It is a great honor for our country that you are organizing this conference and that you have come together to discuss the upcoming election in Germany. Indeed, this is perhaps the most interesting election that the Federal Republic has seen since 1949. The first time that it is not a sitting chancellor who is defending his or her mandate, but a very open question where three plausible candidates vie for the chancellorship from the Green Party, the Christian Democrats, Christian Social Union, and the Social Democratic Party. Many coalition configurations are imaginable in Germany. And if you follow the news, there's a back and forth, all sorts of combinations of 2 and 3 parties are being discussed. But actually all these combinations that are being discussed in the German public consist of parties who have been in government before. They circle around the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, who together form the so-called Grand Coalition that has been in charge for the last couple of years. The Green Party and the Free Democrats. And with one variation, also the party Die Linke, which has no government experience, but this is a less likely variant which is being discussed. So in all likelihood, you will see a German government emerging after these elections. There will be a process of coalition forming, which is sometimes very interesting. Sometimes, the last time it was agonizing because it took a long time and 2 attempts were made. You will see a process of coalition making, but in the end you will see a government emerging that will continue many of the policies that you already know from Germany, that you have known in the past decades. And there is a lot of commonality between these parties, especially in the field of foreign policy. Of course, this is exactly what most diplomats would say about their own country. There's always continuity. We emphasize the continuity. As analysts, you will be looking more closely for the discontinuities and for what could be new or for what could change. Will it be a new era? That's a very interesting question. I think the term new era was coined in Prussia in the 19th century when the old king died and a younger king came to the throne. So after more than 15 years of the chancellorship of Angela Merkel, as long as Helmut Kohl's actually, I think it is justified to speak of a new era in some way. But the values and the basic tenets of German policy will remain the same. I'm sure we will discuss today various points of the programs of political parties, and it is interesting also from a Georgian point of view to look at the various chapters of party programs. You will look for the foreign policy chapter, of course, which appears at the very top for the Christian Democrats and which comes way below for the Green Party. But it would also be interesting to look at what the parties have to say about social questions, such as LGBT rights, or as it is called in the Green Party program, queer politics. You can look for their positions on Russia, on EU enlargement, and all the parties have at least a couple of words to say on this issue. But it can also be interesting to look at their positions on migration policies, on trade, and on energy issues, where the Greens, as many of you will know, are speaking out against the Baltic pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which is a very concrete position they are taking in their program. One thing you will not find is NATO membership or NATO enlargement. And here I come a bit to the questions that were asked by Kornely Kakachia in his invitation and first outline for this conference. Is Germany an ambivalent partner of Georgia? I really think that this term is not justified and does not do justice to the history and to the substance of German-Georgian relations and of Germany's positions in the EU and in NATO when it comes to Georgia. Germany is a strong supporter of Georgia's EU aspirations on every step of the way. If you're looking for reluctant countries, you would find others perhaps. We are also a strong supporter, and we make a point out of being second to none in supporting the substantial NATO Georgia package with 3 initiatives out of the 15 that are in operation now. And I know that this cooperation is appreciated by the Georgian government. The perception as an ambivalent partner, I have to say, strikes me as severely outdated and marked by one single experience of the NATO summit in April 2008. This is quite a long time ago, and we should look at it historically as one of the NATO summits which was not so well prepared and where many partners were struck by a strong drive of the United States to pass a membership action plan for Georgia. This was not the consensus of partners, and Germany was not alone in thinking so. It is a bit in the nature of Germans perhaps that in such a situation we do not do what is actually the smart thing and leave the meeting room for 5 minutes to have a smoke outside and then get in when the next agenda item is being discussed. But no, we sit at the table and we say, this is not agreed. This has not been discussed with us. We cannot approve this plan. Former President George W. Bush spoke out today when Chancellor Merkel visited Washington, and he recalled this moment of April 2008, so we can also recall it, but we should put it in its proper place, a moment that happened in a specific situation for President Saakashvili and in the last couple of months of the presidency of George W. Bush, when the future beyond 2008 was not so important for this particular president. And we can look at the German-Georgian relationship in its entire historical perspective. Next year, we will celebrate 30 years of diplomatic relations. It's really a moment I look forward to, and I'm sure we will celebrate it in Tbilisi in a decent style and after COVID, and with a participation of the newly formed federal government. This is what I look forward to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your very comprehensive overview as well as your position. Well, now I look forward even more for the next presentation that will come and the discussion afterwards. And I would like to invite Bedina Lebanidze, GIP's senior analyst, as well as postdoctoral research fellow at Friedrich Schiller University, Jena, to make his presentation about the policy memo that was shared with you in the chat. You can also take a look at it after the event. The German question that baffles EU's neighbors: can Berlin become a new center of gravity for associated countries? So Bedina, the floor is yours, and you will share your presentation, right? Yourself.
Yes, thanks, Renata. Yes, I will share my presentation. Okay, can you see it? Okay, great. Thank you again. It's my pleasure to be here and to present on one of my favorite topics. Okay, so I will briefly present generally the basic facts about German party system and German elections, even though Mr. Ambassador briefly already covered it, but I will further extend it a little bit, especially for the part of audience who is not familiar with German domestic policy and politics. And then I will briefly link it to Eastern Partnership countries with the focus on Georgia and what those countries can expect from upcoming elections and from the German government after the elections. So, so in Germany, as you may know, there are 6 major parties for now who are more or less electorally successful or used to be successful in the past elections. And also it's in the German traditions that we always have coalitions in the government, which consists at least of two parties. However, out of those six major parties, 2 of them have less chance to become part of the government, especially the Alternative for Germany, the right-wing party, who, unlike some European countries, are kind of stigmatized in Germany, and the default strategy of mainstream parties in Germany is to isolate the AfD and not to cooperate with them or co-opt their topics. So the chances are almost zero that AfD will somehow participate in next government. And the same applies to the left, to the less extent, but still, even though we have regional coalitions in some of the German lands, including Berlin or Bremen or Thuringia, some of the positions of the left party are too much, too radicalized for other German parties to get in coalition with them, even for the SPD or other center-left parties, including the positions on foreign policy. For instance, there's anti-NATO stand, anti-Western stand, and closer or support for close relations with Russia, etc. So again, there is a very low possibility, very small possibilities that the left will somehow participate in the government, in the next government. So that leaves us with the 4 other major parties and the possible options of different coalitions among them. So the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats, or the Liberal Party in Germany. So here you can see the public opinion survey on party ratings in Germany over last year or so. There was some short period of time when the Greens were at the top of the rating. So somewhere in the May, June, they had they reached almost 30% according to different surveys, but then again they went down, and Christian Democrats, who traditionally have been the strongest party over the last few years, again solidified their positions, and now Christian Democrats still are on the first place, of party of Angela Merkel. And another major change, so generally the German party system, also another thing to know, German party system is very conservative in a way that the changes take place very slowly, and the parties, it takes some time for a new party, for instance, to solidify its position and to become fit for the government. And one of the major change in this regard has been happening on the center left side of the German party spectrum, when the Green Party have been slowly replacing the Social Democrats, at least in terms of public opinion polls, as a main center left party in Germany. So the trend can change, of course, again, but as it stands now, over the last year or so, the Green Party have been constantly more popular than the Social Democrats. And then we have several other parties, including the Liberals or the Free Democrats, who have been who had tough times during the last elections and before that, but then again they started to recover from the crisis, and they are constantly over 10%, have been over 10% over the last few months. So this leaves us with several options for coalitions. Again, Mr. Ambassador already talked about it. So just again, a little bit to exemplify, you can see the different options of coalitions of next German government based on the public opinion surveys that we have now, that can again change, of course, the next 2 months. So there are 3 or 4 coalition options right now. And all of them is participation of Christian Democrats, because just they are strongest party, again, in terms of public opinion surveys, if you look at it. And 3 out of 4 possible options as it stands now, that it's also with participation of the Green Party, and then we have 2 other parties, again, the Social Democrats and Free Democrats. And if you look at the list, out of 10 possible coalitions, only in one of them there is a left party included here, the Rot-Rot-Grün, the Red-Red-Green coalition, which is in Berlin, for instance. Have been in the ruling coalition in Berlin for some time. But again, the left party being in a federal government, the chances of it are quite low. Okay, so this is a very brief snapshot of pre-election situation in Germany, and what is to be expected after the elections, and what coalition and what options for different coalitions are there. And now let me move to another topic. So what the Eastern Partnership countries, specifically associated countries, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, could expect from Germany. And also I'll start with a brief recap of past relations between Germany and mostly Georgia, but also the 2 other associated countries. So I know the term ambivalence is not very popular in Germany. That's why I put a question mark next to it. So we can replace it with a complex partnership also, which means that Germany has become a kind of indispensable partner for those countries, especially for Georgia. And then on the left side of this slide, you can see all the things Germany does for Georgia and can't be replaced by any other player on international arena. Mostly we can criticize Germany a lot for, I don't know, blocking the NATO membership, or for not for membership or whatever, but on the other hand, we should also know that everything that has achieved between European Union and Eastern Partnership countries would not be possible without German support. And Germany has been the main supporter also behind sectoral integration of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova with the European Union, including the association agreement as a platform, Eastern Partnership Initiative as a platform, including association agreements, the CFTA, visa liberalization, and then lots of other instruments and policies within the sectoral integration with the EU. Even though, let's say, the Eastern European EU member states, such as Poland and Baltic states, are the most vocal supporter, of course, behind those platforms, it is Germany's support which is crucial to in fact implement those integration steps. And besides that, yeah, Germany has been also top financial and economic supporter for Georgia and the #1 provider for Georgia, and also it's on the top for Moldova and Ukraine. And in case of Georgia, we have the European Union Monitoring Mission, which is, let's not forget, the only international mission which stands which is located in the conflict area and stands between Georgians and Russians, and at least provides some very minimal hedging, minimal protection against the outbreak of another big conflict between Russia and Georgia. And again, the UMM has been supported by Germany, by Berlin. And also, the last point may be that sanctions against Russia, some would argue it's not enough, but still, again, it provides some minimal protection against Russia's aggressive actions, and it was galvanized by Berlin and by personal involvement of Angela Merkel, and it was also kept in place for in the last years on insistence of Germany's position. So those are the all good things which come with Germany, and which I believe no other international actor or country can provide in the same way, including the United States, by the way. Now, that said, there are also some complex or negative issues that pop up time and again in the Eastern Partnership countries about Germany. We can call them perceptions or misperceptions, but yeah. Those opinions, yeah, they play some important role. Well, again, Mr. Ambassador mentioned the Bucharest summit, so I will not repeat it, but it has still some negative impact when it comes to discussion about Germany's role in those countries. Then again, when it comes to security and military issues, Germany generally is very reluctant actor, not only in Eastern Partnership countries, but generally and on a global scale. And it's also reflected in this area. Again, the recent discussions about military weapons providing to Ukraine raised by Mr. Hubert from Green Party, which was then univocally condemned by political elites in Germany, again shows the limits German foreign policy has when it comes to more involvement in military and security areas in Eastern Partnership countries. When we talk about the problems, then we should probably also mention the elephant in the room, which is the Nord Stream pipeline. Construction of Nord Stream pipeline, especially in case of Ukraine, it kind of undermines Ukraine's sovereignty because it increases the leverage of Russia over Ukraine. Of course, you can understand the German rationale if it boosts Germany's energy security, let's say. But even this is actually questionable, because some German scientists or scholars would argue that it's also against German interests or European interests. But on the other hand, of course, it undermines Ukraine's energy and overall sovereignty, and also strengthens the stability of Putin's kleptocratic regime. Okay, so this is briefly to recap, let's say pros and cons of Germany's approach to the Eastern Partnership countries. Now we can also put this also the problematic part into broader understanding and broader agenda of Germany as a foreign policy actor, and all kinds of limitations that Germans have in terms of their approach to foreign policy. So most of them, they are not particular in the in these partnership areas, but overall part of Germany's global foreign policy approach. So one of them is, of course, this anti-militarist reflex or anti-militarist national security culture in German foreign policy. This aversion towards being involved in crises and then military conflicts. So some of them would call it moral opportunism, but still it's a fact that it exists, and we should take note of it. Then also there are certain domestic and societal constraints that German political parties have. They should, of course, take into account the public opinion polls in Germany and generally the public and societal moods in Germany if they want to be electorally successful, and military adventurism and being involved in geopolitical competition with other actors is not exactly in the preferences of German public and German society. If you look at different public opinion polls, they are against the German geopolitical competition with China or Russia. They want better, improved, stable relations with other actors, including Russia and China, and they don't want Germany to see involved in conflicts and crises. And this is something the German political parties should also consider if they want to get votes. And also, very often German policy is also characterized as a kind of economistic, having big emphasis on economic and trade areas and less focus on military and geopolitical issues. And this was the kind of traditions that was established after the Cold War to harness and get as many benefits from globalization as possible, having close relations economically and in terms of trade and investments with China and Russia. And at the same time to rely on NATO for security.
Sorry, Bettina, you have 3 minutes left for the final.
Okay, then I will just go to my last slide maybe and finish 3 minutes. Okay, so now where does it live in terms of next elections and what we should expect from the next elections? So some of those basic policy parameters and policy paradigms can be, of course, corrected as a result of outcome of the next parliamentary elections. So out of 4 parties, including their leaders, probably at least 2 of them, so SPD and CDU, are kind of status quo parties. So they are for more continuation and less change. So the Free Democrats, okay, but they in any case they will be the smaller partner, so their positions will not be crucial. So I think the most interesting part of the possible potential coalition would be the Greens, and some of the analysts argue that they are the only party which are not by default the status quo, and they could bring some change, including the tougher position on Russia. Then again, they are also against the Nord Stream. And they could really bring some change in terms of foreign policy. However, we should also keep into account that the Greens, in the possible scenarios that they will come to power, they will have few major limitations that will also limit their foreign policy options. So we should not expect that much policy change, even in the best case scenario for Eastern Partnership countries, if the Green Party comes to the power. Okay, then I will finish here, and the rest I will be very glad to then answer to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina, very much. And now I would like to turn to our panel and speakers who have joined us today to share their insights, their comments. We have Dr. Andreas Umland, Research Fellow at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Also Dr. Elguja Kokhrishvili, who is a former ambassador of Georgia to Germany, as well as international fellow at the University of Vienna. And last but not least, Dr. Lasha Bakradze, professor at Ilia State University and director at the Georgi Leonidze State Museum of Literature. Thank you very much for joining. I will ask you, each of you, to share your comments. Before that, I would like to invite the audience to start writing your questions in the chat or in Q&A throughout the next 15-20 minutes. Please feel free to be engaged. We also see that some links are being shared in the chat. Thank you for being active in the discussion. And after these interventions, we will have an opportunity to answer your questions. Also, please mention to whom your question is addressed. And now, Dr. Umland, the floor is yours, and could you please share with us your comments on today's topic? What dynamics do you see in German foreign policy towards Eastern Partnership, especially after the elections? What can we be looking for? And seeing your extensive expertise on Ukraine as well, I'd like to ask if you think there is a way to find more common language on security issues after the elections.
Thanks a lot, Renata. Ambassador KNIRSCH has said that the analysts usually focus more on discontinuity than continuity. I would like to add that it's also our business to focus more on critique than in praising something. And so I'm going to criticize here German foreign policies, but like to say at once that when I give interviews and or lectures in Ukraine, I usually in Russian or in Ukrainian, I usually try to defend the German position. For instance, I point out that that Germany has played a crucial role in the establishment and the prolongation of the sanctions regime within the Normandy format, that there are lots of German, there's lots of German engagement in Ukraine, and I suppose in Georgia and in other Eastern Partnership countries as well. But and also in another discussion, I would perhaps also more speak about the mistakes as I see them that other Western countries like the US and Britain have made in their policies towards the Eastern Partnership, and not so much on Germany. But our topic here is Germany, and I think we have in the Eastern Partnership a pretty sad situation. I think that needs to be said, which is not only a problem for the Eastern Partnership countries and above all for Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, but which has also become a general problem for the East-Western relations and the EU's, the NATO's, Germany's relations, especially with Russia. So there's really something to be talked here about, and I think one of the problems that has led to the current situation that, unfortunately, as I would see it, the German approach in its classical and economic diplomacy towards Russia in the last 30 years, and especially in the last 20 years, one has to make this conclusion, has failed. As I would see it, the original sin here was the invitation of Vladimir Putin to the Bundestag in 2001, which was not only surprising in terms of what was happening at the same time in Chechnya, or what has been happening in Chechnya over the 2 years before Putin spoke in German language in the Bundestag and then got ovations from most of the members of the Bundestag, but which was a surprising invitation in terms of the situation in Moldova. And so Boris Yeltsin has never had this invitation. Putin got it in spite of a treaty that that Russia and Moldova had signed in 1994 about the withdrawal of Russian troops from Transnistria, and also in spite of a multilateral agreement, the so-called Istanbul document of 1999, signed by Russia in November 1999, when Putin was not yet president, but was already prime minister. Yeltsin was ill, and de facto Putin was already ruling the country as prime minister. And in both of these agreements, the bilateral agreement of 1994 and the multilateral Istanbul document, an OSCE document of 1999, in both of them, Russia had agreed to withdraw its troops from Moldova. And although by 2001 there were no signs that Russia would do so, Putin was nevertheless invited to the Bundestag and gave a very successful speech in German language, got ovations, standing ovations from most of the members of the Bundestag. And I don't know what Ambassador KNIRSCH says about that, but my impression is that in diplomacy, sometimes what is not said may be more often than what is said. And obviously this visit of Putin to Berlin in 2001 was not about Moldova, and his speech was not about Moldova, and and nobody was thinking about Moldova in 2001 during these days. But that was exactly the problem, in that Russia had troops illegally in a post-Soviet country, and that was no hindrance to get an invitation to the Bundestag and get standing ovations, and nobody would talk about that. And today, and then we had similar signs in 2008 that will here, I think, be even better known by most of the audience here, the problem with Germany's behavior after Russia recognized Abkhazia and so-called South Ossetia, when the modernization partnership between Germany and Russia was established in October 2008, in spite of the non-fulfillment of the so-called Sarkozy plan and the not withdrawal of Russian troops from Abkhazia and the Tkhinvali region. So that was another similar sign, I would say, but not quite as spectacular as in 2001, the invitation to the Bundestag. But both of these, I think, steps by fateful, I would say, German steps, were an indication for Russia that it has special rights in the former Soviet Union, that at least for German-Russian relations, this is not a major problem, that you can get invited to the Bundestag, you can get a modernization partnership and so on, and you can negotiate a new partnership agreement. And in a way, I would now say that I would become a Russlandversteher concerning 2014, because the Russians probably saw, in 2014 thought, when they annexed Crimea and started the occupation of eastern Ukraine, they were really surprised, because why was it that this was suddenly such a big issue? Why was it that Russia could not do in Ukraine what it had already done in Moldova, and had already done not in exactly the same way, but in largely similar ways in Georgia? Why would there be suddenly such a fuss about Crimea and about eastern Ukraine? Although, it must be obvious to, let's say, Germans that for Russia, of course, Crimea and eastern Ukraine are far more important than Transnistria, South Ossetia, or Abkhazia. So I think we sent a number of wrong signals here, and we tried an Ostpolitik. I think that was not useful here, and I think that has something to do with the misunderstanding, a deeper misunderstanding, I would say, in the German national tradition, political thought of the effects of the Ostpolitik of the 1970s. So we have this idea that the German Ostpolitik of the 1970s is somehow connected to the perestroika and then to the changes in the late 1980s, when in fact between Ostpolitik and perestroika and new political thinking by Gorbachev, we had one of the most tense periods in world history, from the late 1970s till the mid 1980s, when the world was on the brink of arguably of World War III. And but there is I would say a mythology around Ostpolitik that is reaching until today, where people assert that allegedly this conciliatory approach of Germany in the early 1970s was somehow a preparation for the changes in the Soviet bloc in the late 1980s. Although during the early 1970s, when we had this detente, the Soviet Union was developing and building the SS-20 missiles that then would become one of the major problems when detente ended. And this then also concerns economic diplomacy.
Minutes left, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I will finish with economic diplomacy. I think there's a similar misunderstanding that somehow interdependence, then building interdependence helps peace. We had in 1970 the largest German Soviet financial deal, that was the so-called Röhrenkredit 1, the Pipes Credit 1. And we had 9 years later the invasion of Afghanistan, and so which was it seems to me an illustration that interdependence is not in every direction successful. And we had in 2005 the signing of the Nord Stream 1 deal, the largest infrastructure project in Europe's history. And 9 years later, again, 9 years later, like with the Röhrenkredit 1 from 1970, we had Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And so there is here, I think, a deep misunderstanding about the, I think the functioning of geopolitics in Eastern Europe. I don't see any sort of anti-Ukrainian or anti-Georgian or something, or a particularly pro-Putin line behind this on the side of Germany, but one has to conclude on the sad record of all of this that the general misunderstandings that I would say Germany has about the functioning of sort of hardcore realist geopolitics had here grave repercussions for countries like Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. And I'll finish on that.
Thank you very much. The next, I will turn to Elguja Khokrishvili, and will ask if you could tell us a little bit more about the upcoming elections and party platforms. So Ambassador already gave an overview, but how the important issues of the foreign policy, how do they really play a role in the upcoming elections across the party spectrum? I will give you 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata, for having me. Well, the end of the era of Chancellor Merkel, as Ambassador call it, in politics will definitely reshape the German political landscape. I would say the political picture in Germany ahead of September elections still looks anything but clear. Of course, the challenges of today's world are undermining the current German foreign policy consensus. The EU is becoming more divided in many areas. Germany's status quo approach, as Bidzina presented, is no longer sustainable to address new foreign policy challenges. However, I think it's too early to predict whether the post-election constellation in Berlin will have any significance on Germany's approach on the EaP region and Russia. So traditionally, foreign policy plays a limited role in German elections, which are dominated by domestic issues. But of course, it's obvious during the pandemic that the increasing connections between domestic and foreign policy issues makes a case to address it more actively than in the past. According to some public opinion surveys covering the last governmental term, the greatest challenges currently facing German foreign policy, among others, migration and COVID pandemic, are relations with the US in a broader context of NATO, security and defense policy, and as well as relations with Russia, as both have significant domestic implications. From a broader perspective, all these issues include questions of how independent Germany and Europe should be from US, especially when it comes to security and defense policy. But the debate about European strategic autonomy is primarily limited to the expert cycles and not part of public debate. In the case of Russia, the obvious domestic link is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. So when it comes to party positions on key foreign policy issues, the CDU-CSU party, together with the Free Democrats, are the political parties most committed to NATO and firmly committed to US nuclear weapons in Germany. The Social Democrat Party has moved under its new party leadership towards more left-leaning position of armed drones, as well as putting into question US nuclear weapons in Germany. In contrast, as Bizina mentioned, the Green Party has moved compared to previous positions. Annalena Baerbock, the Greens have adopted a more moderate tone on the role of NATO and European defense engagement, including European military missions. However, the left wing of the Green Party remains rooted in pacifist policies. On Russia and China, the Greens pursue a strongly value-based approach. They reject Nord Stream 2 and support sanctions on Russia, especially on human rights violations. On the European level, all these parties want to strengthen European integration, but in different ways. The CDU-CSU seems to stand for a pragmatic white azure, more of the same. The Greens oppose the Russia first policy and have a strong track record on human rights. I think there will be a different Russia policy with the Greens and stronger support for countries like Ukraine and Georgia, and a different debate about how to deal with Putin's Russia. When it comes to most prominent coalition option after the election, Bizina already presented, so it would be the black-green or green-black coalition, but there's still open possibilities for a three-way coalition. I mean, black, Jamaica, or traffic light. I'm not going into the details. To come to my last point, it will depend on the next German government to take on a greater role in European security and defense, and whether all this led to a major shift in Germany's policy toward EU system neighborhood. Furthermore, one should not underestimate the persistence of pragmatism within all major parties, as Mr. Umland already mentioned. This pragmatism will hardly work with powers that think in terms of dominance and see convergence with European norm as a threat rather than an opportunity. I think, therefore, this kind of pragmatism in terms of Russia, which failed in the past, will fail in the future. And despite the fact there's no doubt that after the election, Germany will remain Europe's economic and political center of gravity, I fully agree that as the only key EU member state with a natural strategic interest in the EaP region, Germany will ultimately have an impact on how the region performs one way or the other. If I have 3 minutes, I will just. Okay. There was recently there was a very interesting debate focused on Chancellor's candidate's vision for Germany's future foreign and security policy, moderated by Munich Security Conference Chairman, Mr. Ischinger, and President of Ukraine was among the guests a month ago and asked all three candidates from CDU, CSU, from SPD and from Greens about their position Ukraine's EU and NATO membership perspective and security guarantees. So in terms of EU membership perspective, as expected, both candidates from CDU and SPD shared the same position that Ukraine also has a theoretical perspective, but not realistic in the foreseeable future. So it relates also to Georgia. With other words, the next task are to complete the integration process in the Balkans and reform the EU in terms of decision-making. For EaP trio, it means that a close political association and integration into EU policies will be the result of this compromise. In terms of NATO membership perspective and security guarantees, both of them would not be more open than current government. We saw that the Greens wanted to be more open in terms of delivering of the defense weapon to Ukraine, which is opposed by CDU and SPD, but even defense weapons was later interpreted as an ambulance. It is an absurd description of defense weapons. So the answer was no arm deliveries and no security guarantees for the time being. I will stop here and later I'm ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much. Well, it seems that indeed our panel is steering towards continuity much more than for changes. I would like to invite Lasha Bakradze and ask him maybe a little bit provocative question, but well, we had this in the presentation mentioned there. Somehow we didn't want to just leave it such, and Ambassador mentioned as well. Well, being a very knowledgeable observer of Germany and German foreign policy, do you agree that Germany is an ambivalent partner for Georgia and Eastern Partnership countries? And what is your take on it? And thank you. We are getting a few questions in the chat. Please keep writing them. I will also ask those who can to stay for additional 10 minutes. Maybe we can extend our event, right? To be able to answer more questions. As we are combining several languages today, my colleague Shota Kakabadze will translate from Georgian to English, and then we will continue in English. So.
Thank you very much. It is very embarrassing for me that my English is not good enough to speak about so high level discussion. So I would like to speak because I cannot speak in German, in Georgian, and say a few words about this with translation from Shota Kakabadze. Thank you. მე ვფიქრობ, რომ არა მარტო საქართველოს მიმართ არის გერმანიის საგარეო პოლიტიკა ამბივალენტური, ისე თავისთავად საინტერესოა, რომ ამბივალენტური, როდესაც მე 20 საუკუნის დასაწყისში დაიწყეს ამ სიტყვის ხმარება, ერთ-ერთ სიმპტომად იცვლებოდა შიზოფრენიისა. არამედ საერთოდ ვიტყოდი, რომ გერმანიას არ აქვს ცხადი საგარეო პოლიტიკა, რამდენადაც ეს ძალიან კრიტიკულად არ უნდა მოგვეჩვენოს დღეს ჩვენ.
Dr. Kakachia would like to say that German foreign policy towards Georgia might not be an exception when we speak about ambivalence, but generally there's no clear foreign policy of Germany, as it might even sound provocative. And there's also a small remark that ambivalence is a word which was started to be used in the beginning of 20th century. It was one of the signs of schizophrenia.
გერმანიას აქვს თავისი პოლიტიკა, მაგალითად ძალიან დიდ თანხებს დებს ეკონომიური განვითარების და სხვადასხვა განვითარებისათვის სხვადასხვა ქვეყნებში, ისთვისაც ჩვენ რასაკურველია საქართველოს ძალიან დიდი მადლობა უნდა უთხრათ გერმანიას, მაგრამ როდესაც უკვე სერიოზულ პოლიტიკურ დახმარებაზე მიდგება ხოლმე ჯერი, სამწუხაროდ გერმანია ცდილობს ქართული გამოთქვა რო ვიხმაროთ, არც მწვადი დაცვას და არც შამფური.
Germany invests a lot in economical projects and in developments, but unfortunately when it comes to substantial political support or political aid, then there's a Georgian saying, trying not to burn neither a steak nor a meat, so it would be something similar.
არც მწვადი და არც შამფური. სამწუხაროდ მე ვფიქრობ, რომ ეს არჩევნები არ მოიტანს, როგორც უმრავლესობა აქ ფიქრობს, დიდ გარდატეხას გერმანიის საგარეო პოლიტიკაში, რადგანაც როგორც ჩანს, CDU-ს და CSU-ს კანდიდატი ლაშეტი გახდება კანცლერი, ადამიანი, ჩემის აზრით, რომელსაც ფაქტობრივად არანაირი წარმოდგენა საგარეო პოლიტიკაზე არ აქვს, ადამიანი, რომელიც შეიძლება სადაც ლოკალურ პოლიტიკისათვის ვარგოდეს, მაგრამ საერთაშორისო ასპარეზზე იქნება ძალიან სუსტი და ალბათ манипулირებადი პარტნიორი ისეთი ავტორიტარი ბელადებისათვის, როგორც მაგალითად პუტინია.
Well, I personally think that there'll be no substantial difference after these elections, since most likely the new chancellor is going to be Laschet, and he might not be so strong when it comes to foreign policy and would be easily manipulated by such authoritarian leaders as President Putin, although Laschet might be a good in internal politics.
ძალიან ხშირად ისმის ხოლმე, რადგანაც უფრო და უფრო ნაკლები ადამიანი მიდის არჩევნებზე, რომ მათ ჭირდებათ რაღაცა ქარიზმატიული პოლიტიკოსები და ქარიზმატიული კი არა, ლაშეტზე შეგვიძლია პირდაპირ თქვა, თუ რამე შეიძლება დავარქვათ ანტიქარიზმატიული, ეს არის ლაშეტი.
Very often, as we see the declining numbers in turnout, they say that people need more charismatic leader. Unfortunately, if we say anything about Laschet, it's that he's anti-charismatic. So.
ეს ძალიან კარგად ჩანს, მე წამეკითხია პროგრამები, მაგრამ ძალიან კარგად ჩანს მის ინტერვიუებშიც, სატელევიზიო გამოცემებში, ასაც დიდი ხანია ვაკვირდები და ძალიან კარგი ტერმინი ვიპოვე ერთ-ერთ გერმანულ გაზეთში. Unkonkrente Schwemmigkeit. რაზეც პასუხობს ყოველთვის ესეთია ხოლმე, ანუ არანაირად კონკრეტული ბლა-ბლა შეგვიძლია ვთქვათ. და მე ვფიქრობ, სოფლიო, არა მხოლოდ გერმანია, არა მხოლოდ საქართველო და ასე შემდეგ, შედის ძალიან რთულ პერიოდში და გერმანიისათვის ასეთი კანცლერი იქნება ასევე, როგორც უცხოეთისათვის, ძალიან სერიოზული პრობლემა.
Well, in the interviews or his speeches, you can see that Laschet is not really concrete and his answers are very general. And considering the difficult times the world and Germany is entering right now, his candidacy might be a bit problematic.
ჩვენ ვისაუბრეთ იმასთან დაკავშირებით, რომ აი ვთქვათ, იგივე 2008 წლის შემდეგ გერმანია განაგრძობდა აი დატკბობის პოლიტიკას რუსეთთან და ეს იყო ჩემის აზრით ძალიან დიდი შეცდომა არა მხოლოდ გერმანიისათვის, არამედ მთელი დასავლეთისათვის, რადგანაც 2008 წელში რომ ყოფილიყო უფრო კაცრი დამოკიდებულება რუსეთის მიმართ, არ მოხდებოდა ის, რაც მერე მოხდა უკრაინაში. მაგრამ სამწუხაროდ, როგორც ჩანს, კონკრეტულად საქართველოს არანაირი დიდი როლი რასაკვირველია თავისთავად ცხადია არ აქვს გერმანიის საგარეო პოლიტიკის ხედვაში და უბრალოდ უკრაინის შემდეგ გერმანია და დასავლეთი პირველ რიგში ევროპა იძულებული გახდა უბრალოდ რომ რაღაცნაირი რეაქცია ქონოდათ იმ თავხედობაზე, რომელსაც უკვე 10 წლეულებია რუსეთი აკეთებს და როდესაც უკვე იქამდე მივიდა, რომ ღია ანექსია მოახდინეს ტერიტორიისა, როგორც ყირიმი არის, ამის უბრალოდ უპასუხო დატოვება არ შეიძლებოდა, თორე ჩვენ ვხედავთ ახლაც მუდმივად მცდელობებს, რომ რუსეთთან ისევ შეეცადნონ აი ამ რაღაცა დატკბობის პოლიტიკა გააგრძელონ და აი ახლახანს ვიყავით მოწმეები იმისა, რომ უნდათ კიდევ ერთხელ დაეპატიჟებინათ პუტინი და მასთან კიდევ ერთხელ გაემართათ საუბარი, მიუხედავად იმისა, რომ ვფიქრობ, რომ არის რაღაც მომენტები, როდესაც უნდა ითქვას, რომ ამ ადამიანებთან საუბარი შეუძლებელი.
We had already discussed that after 2008 war, Germany has been more in a kind of a sweet relationship with Russia. And only after what happened in Ukraine, Europe and the West in general was forced to react to the annexation of Crimea. But unfortunately, we see that at the moment, they're still trying to go back to this good relations with Russia. And an example of this was the recent attempt to invite President Putin and to start a dialogue with him.
უბრალოდ რუსეთის პოლიტიკა იმდენად უკვე თავხედური ხდება, რომ ეს იძულებულს ხდის დასავლეთს, რომ ამაზე რაღაცნაირი რეაქცია იქონიონ, მაგრამ მე ვფიქრობ, რომ მათ სამწუხაროდ და აქ გერმანიაც არ არის გამონაკლისი, არანაირი ხედვა არ აქვთ იმისი, თუ როგორ შეიძლება ისეთ ავტორიტარულ რეჟიმებთან ურთიერთობა, როგორიც არის რუსეთი, როგორც საგარეო პოლიტიკაში, ასევე შინაგან პოლიტიკაში ასაკვირველია, ან მომავალში როგორი უნდა გქონდეთ ურთიერთობები ჩინეთთან, რომელიც ასევე ძალიან შორს არის იმ ფასეულობებისაგან, რომლის პროპაგანდაც ხდება დასავლეთში, გერმანიაში, ამერიკის შეერთებულ შტატებში.
Russian foreign policy recently have becoming so rude, so to say, that the West has to have some sort of reaction to it. But unfortunately, there's no existing consensus and there's no plan on how to act towards such authoritarian countries as Russia is at the moment, or China, which doesn't really share the values with the Western countries.
Sorry, we have 1 minute left.
Okay, მეტი არაფერს თქვა მინდა, თუ კითხვები იქნება, დიდი სიამოვნებით მეც შევეცდები, რომ რაღაცა ჩემი მოსაზრება მოგახსენოთ.
That's all from Dr. Bakrata's side, but if there are any questions, he would be glad to take on them. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentations, and I would like to give floor to our participants now. We have one question to 1.5 questions in writing, and then please also feel free to raise your hands, and we will allow 1 or 2 live questions to just ask with your voice as well. Let me read the first question. In light of current internal events in Georgia, does the panel expect potential changes in its Eastern Partnership towards that country in particular, towards Georgia, as I understand? And we had also another question about the approach of Georgian analysts towards Germany's foreign policy. But maybe it is somewhat simplistic, underestimating the multi-vector factors impacting on the formation of Germany's foreign policy. So do we want to see particular aspects of it? Since independence, after opening embassies in new independent states, so to say, German diplomacy also learned a lot. Is there some reflection on German foreign policy learning? If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand or unmute yourselves. Or if not, we will just go with these questions. As I don't see any more hands, I would like to add one more. Well, we talked about limitations of Germany's foreign policy quite a lot, which is understandable because of the complexity of it. What do you think will be defining factors for Germany's foreign policy in the near future, dependent or despite the outcomes of the elections? And we can make one round of the answers, plus your comments if you have anything additional to say after hearing other presentations. And let's start maybe with Bidina, and we'll follow the same order.
Yeah, thank you, Renata. Thank you for interesting questions. So I'll reflect very briefly regarding the first question. Well, of course, yeah, this kind of democratic transgressions will have negative impact on relations between you and Georgia, and also including Germany and Georgia. And if this kind of negative transgressions will continue, then it will have overall the negative outcome on the process of Georgia's European integration. Regarding the learning process of German diplomacy, I think the learning as an ability is not a problem, but in case of Georgia, I don't think Georgia is important enough to learn from, I don't know, failures or some wrong steps from Georgian case. We have seen in case of Ukraine, EU and Germany reacted more than in the similar case of Georgia. And what was the third question? Okay, so what would be defining factor? So I think who will be in the coalition, this will be very important. Even if Greens come to power, they will to take into account their coalition partners. But globally, I think also the relations with the US and just general shifts in geopolitical in global geopolitical issues, also in terms of China and how US-China relations will go on and how EU-China relations will go on. This will be very important. You know, Germany and France tried to bring this new China-EU trade deal, even though the Biden administration was against it, but then the European Parliament somehow blocked it. So all those more global issues will have more impact on German foreign policy recalibration, let's say, than what's happening locally in Georgia. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I will give floor to Andreas Umlande for your comments.
Yeah, perhaps I only briefly comment on the second question about the learning. That I guess there was some learning, and we had a rather high engagement of the German government, especially of Angela Merkel, over the last 7 years with Ukraine, exceptionally high. She has personally invested a lot into the Minsk agreements, the Normandy format, the relationships with Poroshenko and now with Zelensky. But still, I see the old features coming through with the readmission of the Russian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in 2019, or as was already mentioned, I think by Lasha Bakharadze, this invitation by Macron and Merkel of Putin to the EU summits. This is sort of a sort of recourse to old approaches that that then also find a lot of critique, and of course the saddest case here is the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. You know, one could even you know, joke that we had the Röhrenkredit 1 in 1970 and the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, 9 years later. In 2005, we had the Nord Stream 1 deal, 9 years later, the invasion of Ukraine. And in 2015, we had the Nord Stream 2 year. And if we add 9 years to it, we should have the next escalation in 2024, which is the year of elections of the president in Russia and Ukraine. So, you know, this is just a joke maybe, but there's, you know, one can see that there's very little learning. The old approaches are taken, and the interdependence theory is constantly misinterpreted. We had this with the recent statement of Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who spoke about a bridge, Nord Stream 2 being a bridge between Germany and Russia, but without mentioning that the bridge, the far more important bridge between Ukraine and Russia, namely the Ukrainian gas transportation system, will be then devalued. And so even the own theoretical approaches that are used, interdependence theory, the whole idea of Annäherung durch Verflechtung, rapprochement through intersection, or I don't know how best to translate that, they are not seriously taken. Actually, they are not applied. This is the problem, that, you know, they're not thought through, that the metaphors are not working. You know, it's all going wrong. It's you know, it's a selective approach of certain theoretical and supposedly persuasive models. And we have also now some research that actually totally contradicts the idea of Russia being less aggressive when it would become economically more successful. There were two studies by a Russian scholar called Maria Snegovaya, who lives in the US, who has both researched the speeches of Russian presidents and the approaches, the attitudes of simple Russians, and she has found a correlation, statistical correlation, between economic well-being or perception of economic well-being of Russians and foreign political adventurism. So, you know, this is a quite scary, actually, finding, in that success generates actually problems. Economic success generates foreign political problems, and it's in phases of economic decline that that would be the conclusion then, that that Russia will be less aggressive, and the whole concept of the modernization partnership here is put under question by such research.
Thank you very much. I will give floor then to Elguja Kokhrishvili next. Please unmute your microphone.
Okay, now, so in terms of first question, I couldn't more agree with Mr. Omland. I mean, this idea that you can unilaterally impose a sensible relationship on Russia when Russia isn't interested will not applicable in the future. I mean, long-held assumption that it can somehow improve Europe-Russia relations by engaging with Moscow from a position of weakness and betting on the benefits of long-term economic ties. So it doesn't mean to call for an end to dialogue as such, but to be aware that increasing pressure on Kremlin would signal that Europeans were serious about their demands. Only then could be expected to make progress on issues of substance. Despite that fact that the heads of Germany's domestic external intelligence services have warned of Russian and Chinese meddling at levels not seen since the Cold War. So Germans, along with the French and other Western Europeans, often push to explore possibilities of selective engagement with Moscow and cooperation in areas of common interest. For economic reasons, the EU doesn't consider imposing hard sanctions on Russia, despite so we will see what will be the result after the election, and what will be the common agenda, common European agenda. So in terms of domestic problems, domestic challenges. So both Georgia and Ukraine has officially recently declared that both have European perspective under Article 49 and are going to apply for membership of the Union. And definitely the internal obstacles that may intervene in the proper implementation of this plan are related to the political instability and the difficult implementation of reforms needed to European integration, and crises like we recently saw in this country or in Georgia are usually result in the frequent collapse of let's say institutions and the paralysis of future reforms. So I will stop here.
Thank you very much. I will then turn to Lasha Bakradze for your responses and closing remarks.
I am once again very sorry, but I have fever now after vaccination today evening, and I am not so good in the mood to speak a little bit more. I have to leave also slowly. I would like to listen if it's possible, but something to say now, it is not so easy for me.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for being with us for today and this difficult day. We understand this. Thank you. Then I would like to turn to Ambassador KNIRSCH for last comments, and then we will close it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Renata. As I expected, this discussion was highly interesting, and I was intrigued by what colleagues put forward. Obviously, there is only one issue here. This is the policy towards Russia. We could have discussed other aspects of the German election, other aspects of parties, programs, and behavior. But I understand that from your point of view, and actually also from my point of view, the way how to deal with Russia is the central question. It is the central question for this part of the world, just simply. So we will have to discuss that further, and I believe that we can do it between Germans and Georgians and together with our other partners. Just one very modest and I guess not so provocative remark. The pragmatic approach towards Russia. It was said that a pragmatic approach towards Russia has failed throughout these past 30 years or maybe 20 years. If I hear that, I would like to know what another approach to Russia would have been. A non-pragmatic, a fundamentalist approach, a maximalist approach? What would that have been? And in what sense would it have been more promising? A pragmatic approach to Russia is common to German parties, let's say to the parties which are likely to form a new government. Professor Umland has spoken about the modernization partnership, for instance, which was launched under a Christian democratic, social democratic coalition, another grand coalition. I had to check quickly in the internet, but I remembered it strongly as a policy of our liberal foreign minister, Guido Westerwelle, who joined the government in a different coalition 1 year later. So this pragmatic approach is really common to German political parties, but I believe that it is also widely shared in the European Union and among Western countries in general. To the modernization partnership, you could add the famous reset under the Obama administration. And you can disagree with the Obama administration, but please remember, had Georgia received a membership action plan in 2008, it would have been for the Obama administration to decide whether or not to move forward with NATO membership a couple of years later. Just as another way to relativize and to put this decision of 2008 into perspective. So pragmatism towards Russia is not a specialty of Germany. Of course, it can be criticized, but I would like to hear the alternatives to pragmatism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, indeed, the relations with Russia, both for Germany and for Georgia, could be a good topic for another discussion and extensive research as well and analysis.
I count on you.
And yes, here I would like to thank you all very much for staying with us, for staying with us even beyond the time, to the participants, the speakers, for your interventions, contributions. We'll look forward to connecting with you in the future through our publications and online events for the time being. Wish you health and nice rest of the week and all the best. Thank you.